Hi, I am Julie Geller, and welcome to Spotlight On. Today is our first guest, friend, poet, artist, incredible human being, Aviva Siegel. Aviva is a Denver based poet. She has her very first chapbook coming out, which is a book of poetry. It's going to be coming out this November. It's called Feet Tucked Under, and it is published by Finishing Line Press. So Aviva is in Denver today. I'm in Israel. We are across the world from each other, but we are close at heart, as we always are. Welcome, Aviva. I'm so happy to be with you today.
Thank you, Julie. I'm pretty excited to be here too. It's fantastic.
Oh, I have just felt so honored to be a little bit along on this poetry journey of yours, and just to see your first book coming out. I'm so excited for you and with you, and really excited to get to kind of introduce people to you so they can really know just your brilliance and your words that I know I am so moved by, as are so many people and your readers. And I'm just really happy to introduce more people to you today.
Thank you, Julie. You've been a pretty integral part of the process, which has been fantastic. So I feel really grateful
Thank
for
you.
that.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, Aviva, can you tell us a little bit about your creative journey? How are
Sure.
you a poet?
Let's see. I have always loved writing ever since I was a young kid. And I grew up as an avid reader too. So I did a lot of creative writing, both poetry and other forms, short stories. I kind of tried some fiction at some point. When I was younger, I ended up going to law school after college. Um, which was a great experience, but didn't necessarily foster my love of creative writing. But then when I stayed home and quit practicing law, really to focus on my kids, as my kids got a little bit older, I realized that I wanted to focus on what it is that I love the most. And actually, initially, I had started out trying writing romance novels. I have a
I did not
sister-in-law
know
who is
that.
a brilliant writer, yeah, and lawyer herself. And she said to me, "I listen. You used to do tons of writing. Why don't you come with me to this romance writers convention? This convention of 2,000 women." And I went, and it was so much fun, and it was so fantastic. And I sort of started monkeying around with that, and then eventually I started taking different classes and ended up in poetry. And I love poetry because in other forms I could go on for far too long, where poetry makes you get really to the heart of the matter in a much more condensed, faster way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that helped me a lot in my writing process.
Nice. So you've been at it for a while. This is not
Yes,
something you
that
just picked
is
up.
true. Yes, I have been at it for a while. Yeah, yeah. I would say probably 10 years, on and off, and part-time in terms of working inside the home with my family and raising kids and all of that in addition. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm curious if you feel like your creative process has gotten stronger over the years, and if so, in what ways or way?
Mhm. Such good questions. Well, it has definitely gotten stronger. Um, I would say I have really learned that sometimes people, well, all even including artists, I think the creative process as sort of you have to wait until you feel super inspired and not so much as a job that you need to sit down and do every single day and have some regular practice about,
Mm-hmm.
which I think was a really important thing for me to come to, because you just have to do it. It's like anything else in life. You just have to sit down and practice it. So whether that's practicing creativity or practicing writing or music, whatever your field is. And I know artists often talk about creative or writer's block, and I always kind of laugh because I think of people who do other jobs, and it's not like you ever hear about like construction workers block or doctor's block. Like I'm sure my husband Dan doesn't always feel super inspired to go talk to people about what is happening with their GI symptoms, but you just have to do it. it's a job like any other. But I will also say that working with Julie as a coach has made a huge difference in me sticking to writing on a regular basis, making sure it's a priority, not letting other things in life not get in the way of that, because other things in life are important too, but making sure that I'm making choices with my time that work well for me and for my writing. Because it's easy to get sidetracked. I mean, for all of us, right? It's easy to get sidetracked, and that happens to with any job. But I feel like there's something about writing, and I think it's true with other art too, that we feel like it's sort of more mysterious or mystical, or we're kind of waiting around for the brilliant ideas to come. And I don't think that's typically how it works. I think you just sit and work on it.
Yeah, and you know my
So,
technical term for that, right?
oh yeah, remind me.
Butt in the chair.
Yeah, it's true though.
I
It's
even have a
true. I
visual
mean,
of
you
a
have to
butt
just do it. Yeah,
in a chair.
literally, you have to just sit. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
So,
I brought this up with you a number of times, but when you
oh
talk
yeah.
about the consistency of work, we've talked about the butt in
Mhm.
the chair. When you talk about the consistency of work, I just remember last, a year ago, last June maybe, it
Mm.
was just like we were like in the thick of the pandemic. And I just remember talking to you, and you were just like writing every day. And your
Mm.
kids were like, you had your daughter
Yeah.
home from college, and she was in the garage, and there were mice, and she's big.
She was like building things in
She
the
was
middle of the
building
night
things
in the
in all
garage. I know,
hours,
painting all over. Yeah. Yeah. That was
and
about
nobody
right.
was sleeping. And I just remember every time I
Yeah.
talked to you, you're like, "Yep, I wrote.
Yep.
Mm-hmm, I
Yep.
wrote."
I think it really helped keep me sane during that period too. I felt really, lucky about it. And and we just had to do it. But it helped to have you checking in on me and saying, "Hey, Aviva, you know, I hope you're not getting distracted by the laundry, for example, or whatever,
Well, one of my
scrubbing the
favorite
tiles with grout."
it's one of my favorite things about working with you is I so often you're in bed. Like you just like to
Yeah,
work in bed. And some
I do
people,
like to.
as we know, there's another client of mine, she writes when she's running. So
Right.
it's just like where it works for you. But I love,
Yeah.
I'm talking to
Yeah.
you, you're in bed and you're just like, yep, I just did my
Often in my
writing
pajamas,
in
I
your
suspect.
pajamas.
Totally.
And I hope it's okay that I just shared that with the
It
world.
is totally fine. I don't think it'll be a surprise to anybody who knows me that much.
So I'm curious. So would you say that you're at the top of your game right now in terms of being a poet?
No. Nope.
You're not.
I mean, I feel really proud of myself and about where I am, but I still feel like I'm a beginning poet. I'm doing a good job in terms of having learned tons, from where I started, and having a more regular practice. And I'm super excited about this book coming out. But one of the things that's, well, I think a little specific to poetry, although I'm sure it can be applied to other fields, and other writers probably feel the same way about their genre too. But it requires a high level of craft. So I think it takes people years and years and years to really convey what they want to convey in a meaningful and um, short and musical within the poem,
Mhm.
musical way, as well as you can. So no, I feel like I have a long way to go, but I love it, and I love studying it, and I've been lucky to work with all these fantastic poets who are professors too, and it's pretty nuanced. So I don't know. I've got a ways to go.
So can you address the gap there? Because to me,
Sure.
I hear a gap. And so on the one hand, you're saying I'm a beginning poet. And
Right.
on the other hand, you're going to be a published poet next month.
Yeah.
And you have a publishing house that read your work and
Yeah,
it's like,
thank
yeah,
you. That's
we're
super
moving.
exciting. Well, I would say I'm getting there, but I think also it's a field that, typically has pretty high standards, and I guess because of the amount of compression, and how much a poet is trying to do within such a small amount of space. Um And when I say I'm a beginning poet, I'm not saying it to give myself a hard time. It's more just that I feel like there's so many amazing poets that I read all the time, and I want to keep learning how it is that they convey what they feel and bring up so much emotion for their readers in such a short, and hopefully often beautiful art form also. Um, and it's interesting. So I have a professor, Sean Singer, who I've worked with a bunch, who's fantastic, an amazing poet, and he's a great teacher too. And he also talks about the fact that poetry requires a lot of emotional maturity often too.
Mm,
So typically there aren't like genius poets at age 15 or 18
mm,
or 22, because there's so much life experience often that the poets are trying to put in that um, poem, that, and of course I don't want to discourage any younger people from writing poetry, but there's just layers of experience that you can hopefully get in there that keep happening to us as we get older.
mm.
So it's not just the craft of writing, but it's also like the craft of learning how to be a human being and how to write about that and identify, I guess, some of the emotional aspects of being human.
Wow.
Um, but
Wow. And
it's interesting.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
No, it's just an interesting. It's an interesting question. I don't have
So,
a great pat answer.
I do want to say as a songwriter,
Yeah.
um, when you say you're reading other poets and you're
Mhm.
like, wow, how do they get that emotional punch? That's what
Yeah.
I feel when I hear some of your work.
Well, thank you.
That I'm
That
like,
means I'm
wow,
doing
that's
something right, Jules.
yeah,
Thanks. Yeah.
absolutely. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like I'm on the right track. Thank you very much. I
yeah.
do. And I love it. I mean, I really enjoy it, and it feels very fulfilling to me. And
Mhm.
working with the poets that I've worked with too, not only are they just amazing poets, but they tend to be very deep people who do a lot of deep thinking, which I just think is important in the world across the board, no matter what anyone's profession or craft is.
Mhm. Mhm. So I wonder, what are some of the pitfalls that you find in your process? Would
Ooh,
you feel comfortable sharing any of those
sure,
with
of
us, and
course.
also
Mm,
how you correct them or
yeah,
how you manage them?
sure. And again, this is something that you have helped me with immensely. Some of the pitfalls are certainly perfectionism. I mean, which I know lots of us struggle with in lots of different arenas in life. And let's see. So one of the ways that you've helped me deal with that too is trying to remind myself that, well, first of all, you just want to get it written, right? I mean, perfect can be the enemy of good. You know, we just want some poetry written. And what are the stakes really? Okay, maybe I'm writing some bad poetry. I'm sure I'm going to write that as part of learning to write good poetry.
Yeah.
The world isn't going to explode. It's going to be just fine. So there's that part of it. And then the idea of just making it as good as I could do today. I have
Mm,
only the current skill set, only the current, life experience, only the current whatever in order to make that poem and to be the poet who can write that poem. Right. So I mean, a lot of it is sort of not taking myself so seriously and just saying I have to, just write anyway. I don't care if it's a bunch of crap, whatever. It's just going to be what it's going to be, and I'll worry about it later.
well,
Did you have to trust the process some too?
and
No.
I love how you say you want to be. You're like, wow, I'm the poet who could write that poem. That's sort of like the deepest part of it, because there's the
Yeah,
work,
that's
but
what
it's like,
Sean talks about that a lot. It's really helpful actually, because not only are you, writing the actual poem, but I guess because it can be such a kind of self-reflective um, process, or you're putting so much of yourself possibly in that poem.
mhm.
So you have to have maybe the distance or the perspective or the insight or all of the above to even be able to be the person who can write that particular poem in that particular moment.
Yeah, and I
Um,
hadn't thought about it till you said it in that way, but
yeah.
that's how I think about art. That it's like the art. I mean, the art is great, but at the end of the day, it's who you get to be
Yeah.
and how you get to be, how you get to spend your
Yeah. And how
time.
you get to interact with the world, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I think so
So
too. I think it's amazing.
so even if the art goes away for some reason, like
Absolutely.
we have the experience of getting the
Hmm.
luckiness of getting to create it and the
Yeah.
luckiness of
Yeah.
getting to become the person who does it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say you have helped me immensely with all of that, Julie, which has been really amazing. Thank you.
Wonderful. So who do you feel inspired by?
Ooh, gosh, it's a good long list. There are a lot of really amazing poets. I mean, some not currently writing or historical ones. Let's see. Who do I especially love? Sean Singer is pretty fantastic. Just his choice of words and his actually also his encyclopedic knowledge of other poets is pretty amazing. I mean, he could just look at what you're working on, help you edit it, but then also come up with several examples of poets who've done maybe what you're trying to do,
Hmm.
and that is incredibly helpful. Let's see. Who else?
And we should specify Sean is, how does he spell it? Sean?
No, oh yeah, Singer.
Yeah,
Sean
and I'm
Singer.
trying, I know
Yep.
his first book was published by Yale Press.
Yes,
His
and then
first book many years ago.
he has one coming out soon. I
But go
can't
check him
remember
out,
who's publishing it.
seansinger.com.
Yeah, exactly. He has a
Mm,
great website too, though, and he's also a fantastic teacher, and he does a lot of editing for people and on all sorts of with whole manuscripts or bits and pieces. And he's just an incredible resource. So if anybody's interested, he's really fantastic. Um, let's see, who else am I? Gosh, there's so many. Who have I liked especially lately? Oh, there's a wonderful poet named Ruth Stone who I don't believe that she is alive anymore, but she wrote for years and years and years sort of on her own, in her house. She was raising kids and didn't I don't think she got published till she was in her late 50s, early 60s. Um and but her poetry was amazing. Uh and it was just inspiring, I think, to see people um, become successful towards the end of their lives. I guess
mm-hmm,
it wasn't really the end of her life. She had a long way to go after
mm-hmm.
that, but she's pretty amazing. She's also very candid and very funny, which is also something that I really admire.
Yeah, and
Um,
a question I have for you related to her,
mhm.
before I'm going to ask you to share some of your work with us,
Sure.
is can you talk a little bit about being a mom, being a poet, and how those
Mhm.
two
Mhm.
interact or don't interact?
Right. Well, I feel like they interact a lot for me, partly because what I typically write about often is my family or my relationships with my kids or so I think it gives me lots of material. Um and it's been fun actually as I've gotten to be more involved in my own poetry and writing a whole lot more. It's been fun to sort of watch the kids kind of get on board with that and be really excited about it um and uh and be really supportive and even to follow some of their own passions in life, even if they're not necessarily what some camps might consider practical. So for example, my daughter Allison loves painting and she's been studying painting much more in college and um, considering trying to figure out how to make artistry part of her career, even though it isn't always the most lucrative field. Let's see, what else? I don't know. Poetry and motherhood goes really well for me.
Yeah.
Um, Also because that's one of the things that I'm primarily interested in when I'm writing is just relationships with other people, um, which isn't necessarily what other I mean, there are lots of poets who do that as well, but lots of poets who don't, who that's not their sort of starting off point for their interaction with the world.
Yeah, and when you talk about your family's pride in you, also I remember deep in the pandemic we
Yeah.
did a reading, a
Mm,
poetry reading on Zoom,
yeah.
and I remember two or three of the boxes were your family,
Yeah.
and they were like lying on the bed, I
Yeah.
think. your husband and one of your kids were on the bed, and then there were like these Zoom boxes of your kids and your family.
It was great. They're very sweet and supportive, which
Yeah,
is awesome because it is not as if poetry is their genre that they're spending a lot of time reading in their spare time, which is completely fine with me.
yeah.
But they're
But
wonderful about it.
they're soaking it up through you.
Yeah.
They're getting it.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're great.
So would you read us a poem or two of
Be
yours?
happy to. Sure. So this is one that is in the upcoming chapbook, which is being published in November. So the other thing with chapbooks is they tend to be smaller books of poetry instead of like, 80 to 100 poems. They're usually, I don't know, 20 to 40. Um, because a time is coming when I won't smell the trace of baby on your neck. Yesterday, you warned your sister, be careful of the cat. He has teeth in his feet. You stood at the toilet, refusing to hold your tiny penis. It's magic, Mom. I don't have to aim. You clamored over me. The sun electrified the sky. Darkness melting into light, Mom. Wake up. Today, you called 911 to chat with the firemen while I fried fajitas. Tomorrow, the lines of your shoulder blades may not be as light as after feathers. You might not sit with your feet tucked under, hurtling towards undiscovered sky, not so small birds. Thank
And I assume that's where you got the title of the book from this
you.
poem.
Yes, it is actually. It's also one of my shortest poems, so it's a little easier to memorize.
Mm.
Thanks.
Will you read us another?
Sure. Sure. This one I need to memorize a little better, but how to be married. When people marry, my stepmom used to say, she was a psychologist and a good one at that. The happy couple aren't in the same rowboat. Waves assault each hull. Sometimes each has to write their own skell to bail themselves out out or drowned unceremoniously in a vein of unclaimed water. But listen, I wanted to say to her, what about when the boats were the bed and a rogue tendril of water splashed me from the starboard side, or the shark chewed life buoy was thrown to me by a sideways glance, or a light finger caressed my collarbone, and the undulating white sheets turned salty. Or we shared the deck after he dropped an oar. A gull cried out in found joy. Or was that one of us? Then he slipped back into his own vessel, and I was back in my galley. The middle lump in the mattress, a partition. Didn't we order a new one years ago? You were supposed to do it. Strictly for sleeping, because his chest hair tickled my shoulder blades. His knees pressed against mine. You are way too hot. After all this time, I am glad for the separate skiffs, but also for the flat of his palm pulling the rim of his boat over to mine and down into watery dreams, keeping company with the rest of the voyagers, long swaying in their separate currents, rowing through years and years of remembered quarrels. I can't believe you said that to my mother, and that you gave the teenagers whiskey shots. Lost over the endless flat plain of the Celadon Sea, not worth tipping both boats over for, vanquished by layers of time and touch.
Wow. Thank you so much,
My
Aviva.
pleasure.
I've had so much fun talking to you, hearing about your process and hearing you read. I I always feel inspired when I hear you read, and
Thank
I
you,
didn't want to
Julie.
laugh and like throw you
I
off, but
no, you're fine. You're allowed to
I
laugh.
was laughing
It's good if
quietly.
I could make you laugh. It's all good.
Yeah, I just
Thank you,
love
Julie.
I always feel such a combination of humor and seriousness, like in just a mix, and also sort of big and small. I just the domestic piece, the more literary piece together. I just feel so moved. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
sharing that with
much.
us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for listening.
So, Aviva, where can people find out about you and your book?
So Finishing Line Press has its own website.
Do you
Um,
do you link to it on your website?
yes, I sure do. Yes, I
And
sure do.
what
So, and my website is, what is my website? Aviva Siegel, poetry.com.
avivasiegelpoetry.com.
Yes,
Go visit Aviva's website. You can pick up a copy of her new book.
that would
Thank
be
you
fantastic.
so much for being with us, Aviva, and
Thanks,
sending you love
Jules.
across the ocean.
Back to you too. Thank you.
Okay, bye bye.